The TX was more than just a new model of Terminator. It was a combination of all the best features of the T-series before it. A machine so advanced and deadly it could take on the feared T-1000. Skynet had, in my opinion, created a demigod of the battlefield. The conception of the TX comes from the T900, which was the first of the T-series specifically built to be an anti-Terminator machine, and the TX is the next in line in this specialisation, but more advanced in every way. Skynet at this point had already produced some insanely powerful machines like the T888 and the T1000, and it now had to make sure its new creation would absolutely outclass them in every single way, as in some cases it might be fighting rogue Terminators with human support, a deadly combination, as we know, and Skynet wanted to take zero chances. The production of the TX involves Skynet's most advanced technologies, not just in terms of endoskeleton, but in mimetic polyalloy and also advanced weaponry that was built into its endoskeleton. This machine needed to have a tool to solve every threat on the battlefield immediately. The resources put into production of even a single TX model would have been obscene. Entire companies of lesser T-series models could have been produced far cheaper resource-wise, and in less time. But Skynet had no choice. The future war against humanity was going sour. It was losing, and it now had to deploy demigods in machine form to have any chance of victory. The first major upgrade was the structure, which was based around a brand new endoskeleton which was made up of malleable crystalline ceramic titanium armour interlaced with nanofibers of carbon and titanium. Now I don't know exactly what this means, but I think we can assume the endoskeleton was almost as powerful as plot armour itself, and its size was far more normal than models like the T800, which were hulking bodybuilders in shape. The TX was average height and rather slim, which helped it blend in with the human population, though it was still pretty heavy at 150 kilograms. This weight may have even increased depending on upgrades applied in the field, so the mighty resistance weighing scales could catch one out still. The TX models have only been encountered as so-called Terminatrix, or female-style Terminators. I think this may be as the resistance had become used to the big male-style T800s, and females were less likely to be suspected of being infiltrators based on their previous experiences, so actually a pretty good tactic by Skynet to switch to smaller, more female-shaped Terminators that attracted far less attention. Now the TX endoskeleton is unique in the fact that it's the first one to be mixed with the liquid metal polyalloy, giving this Terminator some of the amazing abilities that the T1000 had. The major one being taking the appearance of humans that it touches or sees, and before people say no, that is not possible, it's backed up by the fact that the TX enlarges its boobs by seeing a model on the billboard with a larger rack than itself, then copies the model. So yes, mimetic polyalloy can copy based off of sight as well as touch. And the fact that this is done off a billboard, which is technically an edited photo, means the TX could take the shape of any humanoid of similar size that it sees, whether this person is real or not. This is extremely useful for infiltration purposes, as it could switch appearance on the move at quick speeds by seeing pictures hanging in the walls of a home, for instance. And if it assumes the appearance of, let's say, a heavily edited or AI picture, this disguise is perfect, as you're never going to bump into someone who you may know, so far less likely to break the TX's cover. And no need to kill someone whose appearance you've stolen, so no bodies to alert people to a threat, and in terms of timelines, it's less likely to cause problems for Skynet in the future, as killing even a single person can cause major problems down the path. And the polyalloy sheath enhances the durability of the already super strong endoskeleton, meaning the TX is pretty much unkillable by conventional means. Small arms has very little effect, as the polyalloy helps to dissipate the kinetic energy as it strikes the TX, and then smaller calibers have pretty much zero chance of scratching the endoskeleton underneath. Even larger weapons such as 50 caliber armor piercing would have to hit it consistently with potentially hundreds of rounds to take out the TX, and by the time you have hit it a few times, it's going to be shooting back, and most likely, you're going to end up dead. The polyalloy sheath reminds me a little bit like how medieval plate armor worked, with the hard outer layer supported by padded clothing underneath, so combined they could deal with all types of damage. In this case it's reversed, with the outer liquid metal being able to not only lessen kinetic damage, but even heat, cold and even possibly acid. And the fact that the polyalloy has intelligence means the outer layer could take the maximum amount of damage until it would cause permanent damage to it, at which point it would move out the way, and the threat would pass through to the endoskeleton, which 99.9% of the times would stop it without any real problems. And that's seriously cool in my opinion, and I just like how it does remind me of the plate armor from medieval times, which is, yeah, I think it's great, and I think the special effects guys and the actual people who designed the TX for the movie may have taken it from this, but obviously no official source on that. Even things such as grenades and high explosives do little damage to the TX, and it would take massive amounts of either to have any effect. Anti-tank weapons such as RPGs can hurt the TX, but as we see in Terminator 3, the RPG is only really effective as it hits the TX while it's charging its onboard plasma cannon. This seems to cause an internal explosion. That is the reason for its sustaining damage, and lighter anti-tank weapons would most likely be pretty useless. Stronger anti-tank weapons such as TOWs or javelin missile systems would be a far better weapon to take down a TX, if you can actually hit it, which is a big stretch to be fair. The force of heavier weapons could still knock the TX back off the ground, which does give some chance to launch the TX into objects or cause it to fall great distances and allow for our good friend gravity to take a shot at hurting the machine. It would have to be a hell of a fall though, as the TX is ridiculously tough. The TX was also resistant to brute force, with it being hit by a T-850 with a fire extinguisher repeatedly, which did very little. It also is hit by multiple vehicles in Terminator 3, with cars and a trailer doing no permanent damage, and it takes a helicopter being crashed into the TX to cause significant damage, with its legs being mangled to the point where they're inoperable and its internal systems suffering damage. As the Greeks said, when in doubt, drop a helicopter on it. But as we can see, it takes very extraordinary circumstances to even damage a TX, and in most battlefield situations, it's going to be impossible to beat without bringing an army to stop it. The TX is also pinned to a particle accelerator due to its magnetic field, which does cause damage and most likely began to interfere with its CPU, and we actually see its polyalloy sheath being pulled away from its body by the magnetic force. The TX stops this by cutting into the machine with an internally located saw blade, but obviously this is massively damaging to it, but the chance of having a particle accelerator on hand to fight a TX is kind of 1 in a billion. Literally, it is plot armor, so even though this is kind of a cool scene and does show that it is vulnerable to very powerful magnetic attacks, it's not really a sure way to take on a TX, unless obviously you have a particle accelerator at hand, which, good luck to you. And the TX is only taken down in Terminator 3 after it's been hit with various small arms, anti-tank weapons, multiple vehicles, land and air-based, had magnetic and electrical damage applied to it, and then finally, after that much damage, its structure and sensors begin to kind of weaken. It also has no legs at this point, and the TA-50 is able to hold onto the TX and remove its own hydrogen fuel cell, put it into the TX's mouth, and then the hydrogen cell detonates, which causes an enormous explosion which terminates both the TX and the T-850. So you really need a suicidal T-850 on your side to have a chance to beat a TX, plus a particle accelerator, multiple vehicles, an armory, and you've got to hit it with a few cars, and basically a hell of a lot of luck. So yeah, the TX is definitely a tough cookie. Now something interesting did come to me. The TX is not reliant on having its polyalloy sheath to survive, and we see that it's actually stripped of this later in the film. So I wonder, is it as simple as having more polyalloy around for the TX to rebuild this sheath, or would it require advanced facilities to repair to that extent? And could the TX reprogram polyalloy? Because if so, it'd be interesting to see what the TX could do if it tried to attack a T-1000. Would it be able to merge with it and take over the T-1000, or would the T-1000's polyalloy, reject it? We'll obviously never know the answer to this, but some of you will be thinking about this for the next few weeks, so enjoy that. So we've shown the TX is tough to kill, but how much killing could it do itself? Well, this thing decided to bring an entire army within itself, and I'm not exaggerating. The TX packs a total of 26 weapons that we know of, which it's able to access thanks to its polyalloy sheath, which recedes to reveal its reconfigurable arm, the right arm to be exact. This can contain not only weapons, but also various tools to aid the TX in its mission. And one fantastic feature is that if a weapon is damaged, they can be modified, which normally leads to a weaker version of said weapon, but this allows for battlefield repairs, and even advanced tech, which is very useful on the battlefield, especially if you have time travelled back to a technologically inferior time. So I'm going to go through all the weapons because they have cool names, and some of them are throwbacks to other movies. So you have the .223 automatic stopper, the 45mm Cascader, the 783 chain repeater, the Admore Bioblaster, which sounds pretty badass, the BioRail 32SR9 modifier, which I can only imagine what this thing does. You have the CG45 Needler, which is obviously from Halo. We have the Consiglio E-Blaster, which sounds a little bit like the E-Web from Star Wars. We have a circular saw, which you can obviously guess. The Crescent Corridor Blaster, which sounds really good for clearing corridors. We have an EMP generator, which obviously we don't see the TX use in the film, but would have been really useful against the T-850. We have the Finite Rapid Cluster Gun, which sounds like a high-tech shotgun. We have the HD Predator, which obviously I think is a throwback to the Predator films. We have the HK54334 modified, so that's proof that Heckler & Koch will literally sell out to anyone. We have the IAD Chemtech, which is a flamer. We have the KLD Magnum Repeater, which sounds like Dirty Harry's gun on steroids. We have the Laser X-Ray Burst Gun, which sounds like the most sci-fi gun ever. We have the M41 Pulse Rifle, which is obviously from Aliens, great weapon. We have a Nano Disruptor. We have the Nanotechnological Transjector, which is its nanite injection weapon. We have P31 Caustic Shells. We have Rumsfeld P31 Caustic. We have just Plasma Cannon, which is its primary weapon. We have the Saburo Neutralizer, which obviously I don't know what that is. We have a Tracking E-Blaster. The Twin Barrier Gun, which sounds freaking cool. And the XFLRG 44mm. So as you can see, the TX is packing, should I say, every single cool sci-fi weapon from every single film, plus random ones by itself. So, yeah, a really cool arsenal, and I just wish we'd see more in the film, but still, you can't really say that it's not packing enough firepower to take on an entire army. We do get to see in Terminator 3 some of these weapons used in far greater detail. So first is the Plasma Cannon, which is the TX's favourite, as it has fantastic damage output with it shooting a 25 to 30mm plasma bolt, which is able to destroy vehicles and blow people into pieces with a single shot. This particular model of plasma weapon is actually able to take out a T-1000 if a direct hit is scored. This is done to a T-1002 in the comics. It does say a single shot, but I imagine a few shots would be needed to take out all the polyalloy. And it has a decent recharge rate going off the TX's internal plasma reactor, taking about 3 seconds until it can fire again. The plasma weapon is also a great choice as they produce a small EMP effect when striking a target, making this the perfect anti-Terminator weapon. Next is the IAD Chemtech Flamer. It's an interesting choice for the TX, but it does fill a few niche roles. One is against human targets, especially if they're hiding in a building and the TX can set it alight to kill the targets, or if they get a direct shot, light them ablaze for a very painful death. It could also use this weapon to torture or intimidate humans, using the fire as natural psychological effect against us. And it's a great weapon for getting rid of evidence, something that's a priority in time travel missions, as the less evidence the better. I personally learnt this from Hitman Blood Money, but that's just me. The next weapon is the Nanotechnological Transjector. It's more of a tool than a weapon, yet it's probably the most powerful of the entire arsenal. It releases a nanite via a 1.6mm in diameter titanium alloy drill bit and data transfer probe that extends from the TX's fingertip. The drill bit penetrates the casing of any electronic system, allowing the probe to establish a direct connection. A narrow blue aura pulses through the probe as a data stream rapidly transfers into the system. Within milliseconds, the TX gains access, reprogramming the device to establish control. This can be done through a direct link or via ultra-high frequency communication, utilising a downlink to military satellites controlled by Skynet. Once it has taken control of a machine, which can be anything from a simple electronic lock up to other Terminators, it takes control of multiple vehicles as well at once, using them as wheeled missiles. We actually see this from the TX's HUD that is able to take around 4 machines on at once, but this could be much higher. And even though it can reprogram other Terminators like it does to the T-850 in Terminator 3, where it's able to interfere with its systems and CPU, the T-850 is still able to crash its own systems and reset. So even though this ability is very powerful, it's best used on simple machines as they can be exploited to their full advantage. And in the future war battlefields, the TX could cause mayhem, taking over resistance vehicles, infecting equipment, and even altering communications. It would be impossible to fight these things as it has so many tricks up its sleeves, quite literally. I think if deployed en masse, humanity would have been wiped out. And while writing this, I'm actually missing the T-1000. Yes, I'd rather fight that than the TX. I said it. And we also see the circular saw used in the movie, which is self-explanatory. It cuts through things. Though I will say the lack of a gun with a chainsaw bayonet is definitely a shame. So if that's not enough weapons for you, the TX possesses detailed files such as make, model, muzzle velocity, weight, length, cartridge size of a weapon, enabling it to use all military and civilian weaponry ever produced and recorded. So it could pick up and use anything it found useful for the situation, and it would be a crack shot able to engage targets with pinpoint accuracy whilst having such survivability that a firefight would be insane against the TX. And even if you had an entire company laying down fire upon it, the TX wouldn't even flinch. It would return fire ripping through you and your men, and by the end you'd be lucky if you had even dinted it. So at range it's a no-win scenario. Well, it doesn't get much better up close, as Skynet made sure to make the TX stronger than the silverback gorilla. It possesses the ability to effortlessly crush a human spinal column using just 2 fingers, demonstrating both precision and overwhelming power. This feat is a result of advanced actuator systems and reinforced endoskeleton structures designed to maximise grip strength and dexterity, and it wouldn't be much of a stretch for the TX to rip reinforced steel doors off its bolts and smash down walls with ease. Its lower limbs are equally as lethal, with thighs capable of generating crushing force far exceeding that of an industrial hydraulic press. This immense power allows the TX to immobilize or obliterate targets in close quarters combat, delivering bone-shattering kicks or constrictive holds that can splinter reinforced materials with ease. The TX's jaw structure is just as fearsome, constructed from hyper-alloy steel and fitted with alloy teeth harder than industrial diamonds. Its bite force is capable of piercing and crushing titanium like paper. These jaws are optimized not only for raw power but also for precision cutting, allowing the TX to tear through human muscle, bone, and even advanced synthetic materials without effort. It seems every single bit of the TX is a weapon in some way, and these close combat abilities get even more lethal when combined with its unparalleled joint flexibility, far surpassing human limitations and even older endoskeleton-based Terminator models. Utilizing advanced artificial liquid steel lubrication, each joint can achieve an impressive range of motion. The neck, for instance, is capable of fully 360-degree rotation, while the torso can rotate around 180 degrees, so the TX can move in more animalistic ways, which allows it to do very effective yet odd moves. Also, psychologically, it would be definitely terrifying to see the TX do such things, and I for one would be running straight down the corridor, leaving every other resistance fighter to take it on. This enhanced joint mobility not only minimises wear and tear, but also maintains peak performance during rapid movement. As a result, the TX can sprint at speeds exceeding 50 miles per hour for short durations before its power packs show a minor decline in output. But these stats mean it could keep a pace of between 30 and 40 miles per hour almost indefinitely. This combined with its inbuilt arsenal means you have a Terminator that can run around the battlefield, knocking out everything apart from maybe main battle tanks, even though it could probably disable them. It's an insane level of chaos able to be caused by a single machine, but the TX is definitely built differently. The TX would also be able to jump or leap great distances. This combined with its immense speed will allow it to cover ground quickly. Fantastic for pursuits and bypassing resistance defences, as when it's infiltrating, it could simply leap over walls bypassing checkpoints with no one the wiser. Now all these combat abilities aren't useful if you can't focus them on a target effectively. Well, that's no trouble for the TX, as it possesses a very advanced sensor package. Its optical abilities include multiple vision types, from night vision to thermal. It can also do facial recognition and retinal scans to identify targets with 100% accuracy. Also magnification to aim weapons without any need for sights, and its heads-up display can analyse blueprints and maps to help the TX navigate everything from sewers to skyscrapers. Its audio abilities are second to none, with it able to analyse sounds far beyond the range of humans. It can then separate and identify the cause of the sound and where they are located. The TX is also capable of replicating sounds and mimicking voices instantaneously, very useful for infiltration and baiting humans into traps. It can even pretend to be a child asking for help. So remember folks, when in doubt, toss a grenade in the room to be safe. It also has files on just about every weapon, vehicle or tool ever created and how to use them, repair them, or even disable them. And the TX is ready for any situation. It can even pilot a helicopter, knock out a car with a precision shot to the engine block, or even build you a shelf with perfect precision. The TX can also access database computers wirelessly via phone lines by emitting a series of 11 beep tones, creating an audible connection, using its voice processor unit. The TX's internal communication circuitry also allows radio signals to be broadcast on any frequency. It also has safety measures to prevent massive shocks when accessing machines, a good thing to have installed for sure, and the fact that it can access all of humanity's forms of communications and computing makes the TX a very effective reconnaissance unit. The TX also gets a bit weird in the fact that it can analyse blood samples by placing them in its mouth, at which point it will get all of the person's genetic data. This can also be used against rogue Terminators with organic camouflage, or their skin in simple terms. So if one is wounded and escapes, the TX can actually sample and detect the decay rate, so it will know that eventually that Terminator will not be able to blend in. It's a cool ability that really fits into its original role, so I'm kind of glad it included that. Now these abilities don't come from nowhere, they're down to the highly advanced CPU that gives the TX genius level intelligence and the ability to think outside the box to make full use of its wide arsenal of onboard weapons. But even though it's super smart, Skynet had to make sure this Terminator stayed loyal, as its job was primarily to be an anti-Terminator. So it seems Skynet placed very powerful, almost unbreakable safety measures to make sure the TX followed its orders. There's no mention on exact details, but I think Skynet had learnt its lessons from past Terminators, and the TX showed great mission prioritization when it began to hunt down the Resistance future officers when it couldn't locate its primary target. This shows it's adept at having multiple objectives at once, and when its primary objective is out of its reach for the time, it can still be useful to Skynet. In terms of being able to be hacked, I would say it was almost impossible with the fact it contains nanites and is surrounded by polyalloy. The TX would have so many redundancies and countermeasures to this, it would be pointless to try. And that's if you can actually disable a TX to get into a position where you could hack it, which is basically probably almost more impossible than trying to kill one. So yeah, hacking it is a no-no, I think. Now this advanced CPU gives the TX a full range of emotions. Now here's where we get a little bit of an issue, my personal issue with the Terminator 3 movie. So in it, the TX is surprised, it smokes in glee, and it even gives off feral howls when it's damaged. This makes no sense. The TX's CPU would be kind of like the T1000s, or the T850s, kind of like a mix, I guess. It would know how to use emotions. Even when damaged, I don't think it would start to howl and act kind of silly. This is obviously for the audiences in the movie, but this is the only bit of lore that I'm just discounting. The TX would not start howling and kind of smirking in glee like it is. I think it would be more like the T1000, it's kind of like a serial killer, very calm and collective, and it only uses emotions when it needs to manipulate humans to its benefit. So, yeah, you can disagree with me on this, but let's just discount this part of Terminator 3, this part of that movie, because, the emotions bit is pretty awful. And to keep this machine running, well, it required a very potent power source. A miniaturized, highly advanced plasma reactor was the source for all the carnage it unleashed. You actually see the light leak out from the TX similar to the T900 models, though its poly-alloy sheath hides this. And there aren't details on the power levels, but it's safe to say it would be able to run almost indefinitely. Skynet designed these things to win the future war, and once over, probably be ready to fight any threat that comes to Earth against Skynet, no matter how many years passed. I think we've shown that the TX was a machine demigod, having amazing abilities and also being able to control lesser machines. Skynet also entrusted it with these abilities, which shows that Skynet really thought it was loyal. This means to me that Skynet had finally, in its own eyes, created the perfect machine. And I have to say, I never really actually cared for the TX, but after doing this research and looking into it more, I've been converted. It's a fantastic Terminator, and it's only not liked because Terminator 3 was not really a good movie. But hopefully this video has converted you to being a TX lover, and I would love to see the TX in some more modern films and really showing off how dangerous it was. Anyway, thanks for watching everyone, and you guys have a beautiful evening.